This is an extract from the Leader Coronavirus Daily podcast by the Evening Standard and hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for it on your podcast provider. A coronavirus vaccine would be the biggest breakthrough in the battle against this infection that could help us return to something like normal. The UK might be the first country to deliver it.
We've got 30 million doses already contracted for with AstraZeneca. In fact, they are starting to manufacture those doses already ahead of approval, so that should approval come through, and it's still not certain, but it is looking up, should that approval come through, then we're ready to roll out.
Health Secretary Matt Hancock raised hopes while speaking to LBC. Our editorial column says he now must deliver.
Theatres aren't staging pantos this Christmas, so we won't get to see a fairy godmother on stage waving her wand and wishing all the ills of the world away. But we might see one in real life if the Health Secretary Matt Hancock turns out to be right. He's just predicted that a vaccine for coronavirus will work and be available for use soon. This is a massive piece of good news. It's also a tribute to the brilliant work of scientists from all over the world, many of them based in Britain. It's not the first time the government has promised a solution to manage COVID is in sight only for hopes to be dashed. Managing information and expectations is vital. That's why we need to hear next from medical experts who are developing vaccines and will oversee their use. A promise is one thing. We must wait and see if it can be made real.
Well, our Deputy Political Editor Nicholas Cecil's here. Nicholas, why is Matt Hancock so optimistic about the chances of a vaccine within months?
Well, one of the vaccines is being developed by academics and scientists at Oxford University in conjunction with pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca, and this seems to be making good progress. Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, was asked about this morning on LBC Radio, and he suggested that it might be possible to have this vaccine before Christmas, before the end of the year, although the more likely scenario was to have it in the first few months of next year, which is obviously very positive news.
Obviously, Matt Hancock's been speaking about this morning, but we haven't heard since then from anybody in the medical community, from Oxford University, from AstraZeneca. Do we know, though, what progress has been made? Well,
what we know so far is that in July, scientists announced that the phase 2 of the Oxford vaccine trials had shown that this vaccine induces strong antibody and T-cell immune responses for up to 56 days as the trial went ahead. There were no serious adverse events reported from people who had given this vaccine. What's happened now is that the vaccine has gone out to further trials in America, in the UK, in Brazil and in South Africa, and there'll be a couple more trials starting elsewhere soon as well. So what they're putting out the vaccine now to a far wider population to see how it responds.
Now, this has come after Australia said that it was expecting to get some batches out in January or February. It does appear that even if it doesn't start in the UK, some kind of a tide is turning, doesn't it?
Well, certainly there's a great impetus to try and find a vaccine. And as you mentioned, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison created this flurry of excitement this morning when he said that his country expects to receive its first batches of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in January or February, possibly. In his words, he says Australia needs some hope. Australia is not the only country that is desperate for vaccine, obviously all countries around the world. And if you look at America, there's one Donald Trump who'd be very keen to see a vaccine delivered before November presidential elections.
I'm sure he would. Something that might come, at least before Christmas, though, is a new testing system that, again, the Health Secretary was talking about this morning.
Yes, so they're trying to get some very rapid response test systems up and running. They've promised quite a lot on testing, and they're not yet delivering what needs to be delivered. The current test and trace system is not working sufficiently well. And also some people are having to travel hundreds of miles, or been told they have to travel hundreds of miles to have the test in the first place. So the government really does need to up its game on the test and trace system.
But all of this is also coming in the background of a rise in cases in the UK, isn't it, Nicholas? It's so important that the government delivers on what it's raising expectations for.
Yes, so there's this new hope of a vaccine. But before we get that vaccine, it looks like there are going to be some very difficult months ahead in the autumn and first half of the winter at least. It's clear now that the number of cases is rising in the UK as well as many other countries on the European continent. Experts are saying that hospitalisations are going to start to increase, and that's already happening in France and Spain. Fortunately, it looks like the death rate is not rising back to levels seen back at the height of the epidemic. So while lots more people are getting the virus, particularly young people, the hope is that there won't be such a high death rate from the virus.
Search for the Leader Coronavirus Daily on any podcast provider to hear more from the podcast.